And welcome back to Morning Show. As many of you may know, today is Reconciliation Day, and I thought I would start the day off by playing a clip for you from AfriForum. AfriForum was recently at the United Nations and delivered a speech there around minority rights in South Africa.
If racism is measured by the amount of race laws that a government implements, the South African government, with over 125 race laws, surely constitutes the most racist government in the world. Perhaps this is why they failed to report at this session yesterday. The South African private sphere is also culpable, with major corporations shamelessly enforcing moratoriums on the appointment and promotion of minorities. During the COVID-19 lockdown, small businesses were legally barred from receiving government relief based on racial criteria. An organization on the front line of the fight against gender-based violence was also barred from government funding for the same reasons. Julius Malema, one of the country's most influential politicians, has stated publicly and under oath that he might one day call for the slaughter of the white minority. He encourages his supporters to inflict violence against minorities and to chase them off the property that legitimately belongs to them. In a recent speech, he called on his supporters to kill those who stand in the way of his revolution. Despite his obvious racism and hatred for minorities, he has been spared international condemnation. Mr. Chairperson, the UN does not have a good track record when it comes to intervention and the prevention of atrocities. This is because the UN places too much emphasis on diplomacy and fostering good relations with states as opposed to peoples. States and peoples are not the same. The only way for the UN to strengthen its influence in this regard is to decentralize its approach by strengthening its ties with communities and organizations on ground level, especially those who are antagonized by their governments. As long as the UN and global role players favor diplomacy with oppressive governments over the basic freedoms of peoples and communities, we cannot expect progress. The South African government in particular should be called out for its anti-minority aggression. Thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know who AfriForum is, AfriForum was founded in March 2006. The goal of AfriForum was to help them enter the public debate and help shape politics in South Africa. The reason for this is because AfriForum believes Afrikaners have no homeland. South Africa is the only home they have, many of them having been here for generations, and they believe that Afrikaners should still be allowed a degree of independence and self-management in a community where they can look after Afrikaner safety, their cultural identity, aspects of justice and self-independence. In October 2020, AfriForum won the right to be admitted to the United Nations as a member representing minorities in South Africa. This after a long fight against the South African government, who frequently lobbied the United Nations on the basis that they didn't want AfriForum admitted. Now, if you look at the video that we've just played, AfriForum makes some points. The first is around the private sector. AfriForum argues, as do we at Morning Shot, that the private sector is guilty of BEE. It's sometimes important to remind ourselves of the roots of BEE. In April 2003, Thabo Mbeki, the founder of BEE if you want, said the idea behind BEE was to deal with a radical increase in South Africa in terms of the modernization, professionalism, qualifications, and productive skills of its people. It has to do with reducing and eradicating poverty, so all South Africans will have more to spend. The goal is not to impoverish whites, but to enrich blacks. He stressed those who benefited from apartheid, our white citizens, had a responsibility to actively contribute to South Africa, and a South Africa that belongs to all here, black and white. But this isn't what we're seeing in the modern times. We are seeing BEE is being used to hammer white individuals, to make them poorer, to enrich those that are in connected positions. This BEE rhetoric reached its crescendo with the Jacob Zuma era. Citing capitalism and whiteness as being social ills became popular during that era. And many Afrikaners and many whites were subjected to claims of being land thieves, colonizers, settlers, many of them having lived here for centuries, their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers, their mother and father having been born native to this land, with many black nationalists denying them the ability to exist peacefully. Many of them argue that they shouldn't be here, with many failing to acknowledge that for many of these individuals, there is no European homeland for them to go to. The only place that they've ever known is South Africa. Additionally, the national state, the national government, is attempting to class Afrikaans, a language native only to South Africa, as a foreign language and not worthy of respect or protection within the state. Recently, we did a video around Julius Malema, around the words that he uttered against white individuals. You may recall he said, "Don't be afraid of killing for the sake of revolution." We interviewed the Freedom From Plus parliamentary MP about the charges that they were raising against Julius Malema, and we also noted that the Human Rights Commission raised a case shortly afterwards. But to date, this government, this ANC government, remains silent. The NPA has not prosecuted Julius Malema for his utterances, and in a recent court case it was deemed acceptable to chant slogans such as "Kill the Boer" often being a slogan for Afrikaners. And again, if you look at these anti-white slogans continued. Julius Malema claimed whiteness has no place in South Africa, and yet again the South African government remains silent. We recently saw a case in the Western Cape whereby a white individual apparently or allegedly ejected a black individual from a pub. Another white individual came along to the defense of the black individual, arguing that why was colonialism and racism still occurring in South Africa, specifically in the Western Cape? And would you know it, upon investigation it turned out that the individual involved, the ones who came to the rescue, and the debacle as a whole seemed to have been fabricated by the EFF in the Western Cape, specifically the student union, who the members were known to be affiliated to.
We have created a brand new insurance brokerage called, funny enough, Morning Shot Insurance Brokers. So if you're interested in saving money on insurance, number one, but most importantly, having a Zoom with me and my wonderful face, why not send me your insurance schedule to ramon@morningshot.co.za? Let's chat. Maybe we can help each other save money and deliver superior service, because that's what we're all about here at Morning Shot.
It's safe to say that AfriForum is doing the Lord's work, and we thank them for the role that they play in this country. Many opponents claim that AfriForum is a racist organization because of its founding roots, which are based on self-determination and the Afrikaner culture. The meaning behind these claims is that AfriForum longs for apartheid and longs for it to return, but this is far from the case. The nation-state of South Africa has pitted itself against its people, the very people it intends to govern. We recently did a video whereby we highlighted where is the ethnic diversity in the ANC's cabinet, where is the ethnic diversity in the EFF's cabinet? It doesn't exist. Both organizations in the modern era have become nothing more than black supremacist nationalist organizations. AfriForum argued at the United Nations that whilst you continue to foster relationships with states rather than people, this type of abuse would continue. We have recently seen an example with the Dis-Chem debacle, where the private sector continued to adopt state-sponsored black economic empowerment, which we could argue as being racial selectivism. This form of racism in South Africa has now reached a point where it just becomes nothing more than political point scoring. BE was never intended as a tool of social upliftment and economic empowerment. It was simply a way to establish big business and a way for them to win incoming favors of political influence with the incoming democratic government. Big business in South Africa, such as SPAR, has recently come under the spotlight for using BE as a way to defraud funds. We at Morning Shot are bullish about the future of our country. Our country is decaying, and in many respects, minorities are under constant attack. Our ancestors went through far more challenging times than we do. To expect South Africans in a modern context not to be willing to do the same is of the highest arrogance. We are comforted by the work that organizations such as AfriForum do. The government must be called out on its propaganda, and the words of Thabo Mbeki must be re-realized. Mr. Mbeki in 2003, when he first adopted BEE, had a noble idea in mind, and that was the upliftment of the majority, not to the detriment of the minority, but in order to support a growing economy. With the Jacob Zuma era, which we saw ushered in a degree of communist ideas, of a power that cannot be grown but only redistributed, we have seen South Africa's fortunes plummet. We now live in an emerging market that doesn't expand in the same rate as others do. Many hedge funds say that they refuse to invest into South Africa because of our labor laws and the BEE requirements that go with that. The idea that South Africa is for all those who live in it should be re-realized. Rather than disempowering and emasculating the white minority, a better South Africa can be achieved. 2024 is on the horizon. Make your vote count. On today, Reconciliation Day, we look back at the noble ideas of a rainbow nation in South Africa, but realize those ideas are nothing more now than a dream. Reconciliation is not possible whilst a minority is persecuted for the political gains of those who seek to self-enrich.